fish prefer those shallow riffles, either in the main channel or off in the side channels of the river, and sometimes just a few inches of water. And for that reason, reds can be pretty easily seen by looking for bright, clean ovals on the river bottom. The gravel is typically much lighter in color than the surrounding gravel, which actually has to do with how the female builds the nest. And this picture on the bottom right-hand corner is a picture that I took on the Boise River near Eagle Island State Park back in November. As many of you know, trout have their own spawning seasons. Brown trout will spawn between October and January, with peak spawn typically in late November, early December. Rainbow trout will spawn in the spring between March and May, give or take. The South Fork of the Boise River is actually closed to fishing during this time to give rainbow trout ample space to spawn undisturbed. And so we have a couple things that influence or trigger the spawn. Whether the days get shorter or longer, trout will tune into that change in photo period along with the change in temperature, again in that mid to high 40s. And then flow, of course, will influence the spawn as well. Okay, and then when all these factors come together, mature fish will migrate upstream and seek out that perfect spot to lay eggs. The female will identify a suitable spawn site and pair up with a male. It's at this time when their secondary sexual characteristics really start to come out and their colors become much more vibrant. The male will court the female, and this kind of involves him swimming up beside her and sort of vibrating his body alongside her lateral line. And that is sort of a cue to the female to release the eggs or start to spawn. And so these pictures here are of the female flexing her body and using her tail to carve out a depression in the gravel. And when she does this, the fine material is sort of swept away downstream, creating that stream bed lighter in color. And so I do have a really nice video I'm gonna pop out and hopefully it will play. Bring this up. This is actually a sea trout, but I think the video was the best quality I could find, and she does a good job of displaying that digging behavior. Alrighty. So hopefully everyone was able to see that. It's a pretty arduous process. I mean, it's definitely hard on the body, but okay. So moving on. The female, after she sort of excavates the nest, she will deposit eggs, and the male swimming beside her will fertilize her eggs with his sperm, which is actually called milt, so M-I-L-T. So once they're fertilized, the female moves upstream and begins to cover the eggs with gravel. The number of eggs a female spawns is typically dependent on her age and size, but a large female can spawn up to 3,000 eggs. And I also have another really great video for the actual process of spawning. Pull that up right here. All right. So it was a little hard to see, but the male was able to synchronize with the female and release his milt at the same time that she released her eggs, followed by immediately covering up those eggs to protect them. And so this is a very large red that you might see. Not all reds are this size. Some can be as small as a basketball if the fish is smaller, and others are absolutely huge. This one's a good example because you can see the red arrows kind of where that depression is that the female carved out. And then behind it, indicated by that blue arrow, is that sort of raised pillow where the eggs are buried. And so this slightly raised area is actually really good for the eggs because it forces the water over the red at a higher velocity. And when you think about it, that's really good for the eggs because more water means more dissolved oxygen, and more oxygen means the embryos can grow a lot faster. And so it is not uncommon to see many reds in one area, like a colony of reds, particularly in places like the Owyhee River in Oregon. You'll see many large fish creating large reds in some of the more favorable areas of the river. And some females will even create multiple reds in a single season, but she will only spawn once. And so ultimately, this is, the culmination of spawning. These little eggs are released from the female and buried in the gravel, where they will incubate for 1 to 2 months. And so the eggs develop into sac fry, which take refuge in the gravel for another 2 weeks or so, anywhere between 14 and 30 days, depending on temperature. They are very delicate at this stage. They are still feeding from the yolk sac, which provides nutrients for the fish until it's able to feed from the water column. And then once that yolk has been eaten up, the fry emerge from the gravel, they move towards the light, and they will start to eat tiny insects in the water. And as you can imagine, mortality rates at this stage are very high. So it's almost kind of a miracle when fry are able to survive and develop into adults. A very low percentage of fry actually survive, only about 10%. And so there is a lot of conversation about the ethics of fishing during the spawn. Of course, as responsible anglers, we want to stay away from reds and actively spawning fish. Spawning is the most sensitive time for them, and so we really don't want to add another layer of difficulty to their situation. I think many are aware that spawning fish are extremely easy to catch. So it's not really a fair sport. They are extremely visible in the water, but they're also way more aggressive than normal because, leading up to the spawn, they are ravenous, they eat a lot. And then when they are actually on the red, they do everything in their power to defend their young, their fry. So they are extremely aggressive towards any lure or bait or fly that comes even close to their red. And so I would say most fly fishermen and women have really good personal ethics and an understanding of, sustaining the fishery. So it's sort of up to us to pass on this information to more inexperienced anglers. Okay, and I did want to highlight just how energetically expensive spawning is. Pretty much all of the trout's energy during this time is diverted towards reproduction. So developing those gonads and secondary sexual traits takes a lot of energy. It also takes a lot of energy to construct the nest and court and compete with other individuals. It really adds up to be a very taxing process for these fish. And like I was saying, the fish are way more aggressive, more territorial during this time. And if you've never seen this before, the fish will bite each other, they'll beat each other up, they will chase each other. And this is both males and females. And so I do have one final video that I personally really like. It's not of trout, it's of chum salmon, but they sort of display those behaviors that you would see in trout. And you'll get to see just how crazy this time is for them. Let me get this started. Release the eggs. Okay, so pretty fascinating behavior. I have witnessed all of these behaviors in spawning fish in the Oahe River. It's always such a treat to just see how they how they go about spawning. And so one last thing I wanted to touch on is that fish are more vulnerable to predators and disease when they're spawning. This is a video that I took of a fish that probably spawned this past fall in the Oahe River. And as you can see, it's covered with this white cottony fungus. This fungus is called saprolegnia. It is a naturally occurring fungus that probably invaded the battle wounds of this spawning fish. So as you can see, he's kind of on his way out, but probably put his all into spawning this past year. Oops. Okay. And so, all in all, every fish deserves a chance to breed. So we really want to avoid anything that could compromise that. And that would include walking on the reds, of course, wading upstream of them and causing issues with turbidity. Targeting spawning fish is just not a good idea. And then disturbing or scaring them off their reds is problematic because some fish just won't come back to their reds. And we want to avoid sort of all these things altogether. And so that is pretty much all I have for you. I hope that covers pretty much all the basics of reds, and I am happy to take any questions you may have.
Did you say how many eggs they lay? I'm sorry if I missed that.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So it really does depend on the size and the age of the female. Sometimes it's just a couple hundred for smaller females, and then those older, anywhere above 4 years of age, can spawn about 3,000 eggs.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
Emily, that was excellent presentation. And I thought it was excellent. It's very interesting to me that the different species spawn at different times of the year.
Mm-hmm.
Is that to avoid cross breeding perhaps, or what's the reason behind that?
Yeah, so it kind of comes back to the way the species evolved. So brown trout are native to Europe and some parts of Northern Africa, whereas rainbow trout, I think, the steelhead are native to Idaho, but these species are largely introduced, so they've evolved different life strategies and evolutionary traits. But yeah, I mean, of course, but it definitely helps that they sort of spawn at different times of the year. Otherwise, there might be a lot of competition.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed in the video that the female looked bigger than the males. Is that typical, or was that just by chance on the video?
So females, yeah, they definitely get like a lot more rotund than the males, but they don't necessarily, they're not too choosy about which male, which like a particular size of male. So I think whichever male can get to her first and defend her is going to be the one that ultimately fertilizes her eggs. But yeah, it can really vary. You can see a smaller female with a larger male, or two fish of the same size. It really all depends.
Emily, it looked like most of these reds were pretty shallow, but how deep would a red go?
For rainbow trout and brown trout, you really don't see them any deeper than
16
about
inches.
1.5 feet. Yeah, 16 inches. 2 feet might be a little bit too deep, but yeah, pretty shallow. It's amazing. And when you go to the Oahe River, you'll see, large fish, kind of like with those chum with the fins sticking out of the water, and they're thrashing and trying to just maintain themselves in this really shallow water.
That fungus thing, because I saw someone recently catch a fish that looked like that. It's a fungus that eventually kills the fish.
Correct. So it's, we call it a fungus. It's actually more of a water mold. It's something that it's opportunistic. So when the immune system of the fish is sort of compromised or suppressed, it will kind of invade, because I guess all the abrasion sort of leads to that like a decreased mucus layer. So the trout is much more susceptible to disease or pathogens.
But it ultimately kills them. They don't recover from that.
They can recover. I think with that example I showed you is a little bit of a heavy burden. So yeah, I guess it all depends, but they can clear it if their immune system can overcome the infection.
Are there more places than others on the Boise where you see the reds like in town?
Ooh, so in town, I fish all over the Boise River, and I have really seen them in a lot of different areas. I think where the water is deeper in the main channel, you'll see them off to the side in those side channels. But I've also seen them where the water's lower in the main channel as well.
I was wondering, so the eggs, pardon me, are laid and fertilized, and then how long does the male and the female stay close to the eggs?
That's a really great question. I was actually just talking with someone about this because I don't know exactly how long they will stay on the red. And typically it is the male that guards the nest. The female kind of carries on with her day, and the male will stick around. And I think it can be anywhere between a week to a month, but I'm really not sure.
Wow.
So it's that male who guards the nest, unlike with bass where the female will guard the nest.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
When does the kype on the male appear?
So that will appear just prior to spawning, starting when the fish are coloring up, and when that energy is diverted towards all those physiological changes. I don't know exactly like how close to the actual spawn date that it appears, but I'm guessing that as soon as they get those cues from light and temperature and even barometric pressure or whatever, they probably start kicking in.
I noticed that the female opens her mouth and looks like she's screaming when she releases her egg.
Yeah.
Just like childbirth.
Yeah. So actually they both do that. And it's funny that you bring that up because I didn't know why they did do that before putting this presentation together. And then I read that opening their mouths really wide like that actually helps stabilize them in the water column when they're trying to release their eggs. And I imagine that it also probably helps them take up oxygen through their gills, but that's just my own personal hypothesis. But if you do look in the videos, they do kind of, they are kind of able to like hover in that exact same spot.
Emily, this is Carla. So so the Boise River flow starts to creep up for irrigation in April, probably end of March. That's going to screw up those low or shallow riffle areas that the trout are looking for. So does the Boise River really have that much spawning?
So you mean when the flows increase in April or so, you're wondering if that affects the reds?
Right. So a natural river would be low flow from March through May now, right? But since the reservoirs upstream need to be regulated and the irrigators want their water, this is not a natural system. So did the trout have difficulty finding the shallow areas for successful spawning?
Let's see. So I guess that would be more a problem for the rainbow trout than the brown trout. I think that they are able to kind of put their reds in places that are able to kind of overcome those changes in flow. I I don't think it's a major problem for rainbow trout, but I'm not entirely sure. Like, especially since many of the reds are in those side channels and such.
Mhm.
But that is a very good question. And I could definitely look into it for you.
You
So
can
Emily,
report back.
Emily, it's only native trout that spawn, right? The ones that are from the fish hatchery are sterile and don't spawn.
Correct, yes. They
And
are,
what percentage of the fish would you say that are in the Boise River, like around town, are actually native fish as opposed to hatchery fish?
that is a good question. I would have to probably read some of the biologist reports. I don't know what the ratio is, but that is a good question. I will definitely follow up with that.
You could email me the answers, and then we could,
Sure, I'll write a note to myself.
yeah, and then we could get them to the group. Good questions, everyone.
Well, I know they stock a lot of the fish in the Boise River, especially around town. So I was just kind of curious on, how many of those are actually native and how many of them are actually from the hatchery.
Right. That is a good question.
How many fish do you guys usually release into the Boise River around town?
Oh boy, in a whole year, tens of thousands.
Wow. Yet they're pretty elusive, aren't they?
Yeah, I'll say.
Do you release more of the browns or the rainbows, or is it equal numbers?
Definitely rainbows. I think we actually do any brown trout stocking in town. So all of them are triploid, sterile rainbow trout.
Okay.
Nice.
Are there any more questions? There was someone in the chat.
Emily, I had another follow-up question, and sorry, my mute button wasn't unmuting, so I could thank you on the other answer. So you said that the eggs are actually on the high area. So would that be around the edge of the red? So the deeper area, the eggs are not in that area. They're actually on the kind of the crown of the.
Correct. And I'll pull up, I think this picture is probably the best. Yeah. So that blue area where it's raised is where the eggs probably are, and they're buried there. Whereas that depression is kind of where the female originally was positioned, and she was digging. And so when she was digging and releasing her eggs, sort of all of that fell behind her.
Yeah, so the hole she's making is the source gravel hole.
Right.
Cool.
Yeah.
I'd never realized that. Thank you.
Yeah, and over time, when the reds are really fresh, they're very easy to see, but over time, sediment or algae kind of starts to make them blend back into the river. So they're a little bit harder to see, but when they're fresh, you can totally see that depression and that little pillow behind it.
So if you are stumbling around in a street.
Oh, your mute's on, Carla.
Sorry, I just turned it again. So if you're stumbling around in a stream and realize, oh, that's a red, and you're kind of falling over, the best thing to do would be to step in the middle if you can't totally avoid it.
I think so. Yeah. Yeah, if you realize last second.
Right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So that fighting amongst the fish is between the male and the female.
Actually, it can be female to female, male to male. Really, if anyone comes into the territory, they're fair game for a fight.
Okay.
The eggs are a really good source of protein for other fish. So oftentimes you'll see some little scavengers sort of looking for a quick meal, and they'll fight those off. Or if if another female likes another female's red, she'll be fought off. And then, of course, the males fight for the female. So the males have to defend as well.
Okay. Oh. Really interesting. Are there any more questions? This was a fascinating presentation, Emily. I learned so much.
Oh, good. I'm
Yeah,
so
it was
glad.
a great presentation. Great for our club to learn more about this. Are there any more questions? All
No,
right.
thank you.
I just want to tell her how, thankful we are that she's a member of our club and did the presentation tonight.
Yes.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
I agree.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you so
Kudos.
much, Emily.
You're
Kudos
welcome.
to
Thank you for
Emily.
having me.
Thank
You're
you
most
so
welcome.
much. We
was
really,
excellent.
really appreciate it.
Yeah, and maybe when I respond with some answers to your questions that I couldn't answer tonight, I can leave my email, and if anyone ever wants to reach out or has any questions, you can contact me.
Okay, yeah, we can post it on our Facebook.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank
Very
you. Emily.
good.
Thank you.
All right. Does anyone else have any comments or questions before we close for tonight?
Are you back, Lisa, or are you still away?